Buckle up, NFL fans. It's finally Thursday, and it's time for football for the first time in almost, 6 months now. So really excited to get that started. And welcome to the pessimistic, optimistic, and everything in between. My name is Connor Philippi, and welcome to the Minnesotan Sports Podcast. And like I've been mentioning, the countdown from all the way from February, every single day has been counted down to this moment when the Rams are going to be playing the Bills in the first game of the season, and that's going to be happening tonight. So we're jumping right into the swing of things, and just that first kickoff is always the best feeling when you know that football is back. So we are going to be kicking this off by kind of giving predictions about all the teams down the stretch, and we're going to kind of get to that pretty quickly because we're going to start with the NFC East, going all the way through the NFC, and then we're going to continue to the AFC, and our marquee prediction is going to be the AFC West, obviously the best division in football this year, and what could end up being one of the better divisions total in NFL history in at least the last 5-10 years, if not even further back. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go and say the records for every single one of these teams. I'm just going to put them in order because at the end of the day, there's going to be a certain amount of teams that make the playoffs and a certain amount of teams that don't. So I'm just going to end up predicting who's in and who's out. And just, if I predict records, it's just going to get too statistical and people are going to be looking through saying, oh no, you have this team winning more games than this team. That's just too much homework for me to do if I'm making 3 videos in one day. So I'm just going to go fourth to first and go from there. So let's start things off with the NFC East, and this is intriguing because I think there are a few teams that could potentially take the division, depending on how you look at it. I only have 2, but I've heard 3 floating around, and those 3 are the Washington Commanders, Eagles, and Cowboys. And the Giants are the one team that have not been involved in any conversations, and rightfully so. This Giants team has some glimmers of hope. I mentioned them a little bit in my Vikings predictions, but I just don't see them winning a whole lot of games this year either. They just continue to be in that continuously long rebuild, and so I'm going to have to put them at the 4 spot for the NFC East. But then moving on, another team that I think people are kind of overhyping, in my opinion, are the Washington Commanders. And I understand that defensive teams can still carry their subpar quarterbacks a little bit further and maybe even make the playoffs. It's happened before where you've seen these teams with just kind of completely locked down defenses that have been able to kind of make their offense look better than they are because they're continuing to still win games. But the Washington Commanders offense, I have absolutely no faith in. Terry McLaurin might be the only good thing about that offense. I have no faith in Carson Wentz. I haven't had faith in Carson Wentz since he left the Eagles, and I just don't see this team winning many more than 5 or 6 games. So I'm going to put them slightly above the Giants at the 3rd spot in the NFC East. And then we've got the 2 that are kind of difficult because I've seen this go either way, Cowboys or Eagles. And the fans that want to go with the more traditional approach of, I want to go with a safe bet and pick the Cowboys because even though they're not always the best team, they seem to always take this division, which is a very weak division nonetheless. But you can go that route. You can go with Dak Prescott and say, this is a team that historically has at least won enough games to take this division. They've never been so bad that they haven't been able to at least win this division. But now we're seeing a team rise up in the Eagles where the Cowboys can't just only barely squeak by anymore because the Eagles will also be good enough to contend. So I think the winner, for the first time in a while, the winner of this division is going to have to fight for it. And I want to pick the Eagles, but I'm not quite sold on them yet. And I mentioned that again in the last podcast episode, where I just feel like I need to see a little bit more of Hurts before I have confidence that they can win enough games to overtake the Cowboys. I see the Cowboys as winning kind of in the range of around 10 games, maybe 11. this year because they at least have enough talent to get to that point. I don't see them winning as many games as they did last year because Amari Cooper's gone. But that being said, I do think that they'll win enough games to take this NFC East. But I do 100% see a potential where the Eagles make the division. But maybe they'll sneak their way into the wild card, and I'll go over my wild card teams as well here too. But that's the NFC East for you. Now let's just jump right into the NFC North now because it's a major point of contention, obviously, and this is the one where I'm obviously going to seem biased no matter what I pick. But we're going to start off with the Chicago Bears down below. I think the Bears will be fourth this year. I really think there's nothing much to this team. I think that they've got a couple talented guys, but really their offense took a step back. Their defense took a step back. The Bears haven't been able to get decent, besides Mooney, they really don't have any decent wide receivers. And even if they did, I don't trust Justin Fields throwing the ball behind one of the most awful offensive lines that we'll see all year. They're really not doing Justin Fields any favors in his development by giving him one of the worst offensive lines he could possibly work with. And I think that's going to be the deciding factor in keeping the Bears at a very minimal amount of wins this year, especially because the last couple years their defense saved them a little bit, and now multiple guys are gone for them, specifically Khalil Mack, who got traded to the Chargers. So their only lifeline last year is now gone, and I doubt they'll win more than 4 games this year, so I'm going to put them at the bottom. The Detroit Lions, that means, will finally be able to not be 4th in the division. They'll be 3rd. And I think that there is a lot of fight in this team. If you saw in my previous video, I predicted the Vikings to lose or split the season series with them and lose in Detroit later in the season because I just think that they have such a fight to them. If anyone watched Hard Knocks, you know that the culture in that building is insane right now. And I no matter how good of a team they are as far as talent goes, they're a team that you're going to be afraid to face because they are not relenting. They're not giving up no matter what. Every single one of these guys had to fight really hard to make their presence known on this team, and there is something to be said about that. Obviously you want a lot of really good guys competing for a spot, but when you got these players that don't always have the talent that other guys do, but they have to make up for it in heart, you really see a lot of teams that will fight to the very end, will get comeback victories, and will not allow teams to come back as well as you'd think. So I think the Lions are a team to be feared, and I think they'll win 6 or 7 games, maybe 5 or 6, I don't know. But they'll win more than the Bears, but not any more than these other 2 teams, so they're solidly at 3rd. Now we've got the Packers or the Vikings, and I know that I would be biased if I said the Vikings, and that's not the reason why I'm not going to say the Vikings, because I would probably say it if I really thought it was true, but I just can't quite pick the Vikings to win this division yet. Like I said, I think they'll be a 11-6 win team, and the factors that I mentioned, the offensive line, the defense not being proven yet, those 2 are still big factors. And obviously Kevin O'Connell, I think, is going to do tremendous things for this team, but it's possible that he either stumbles out of the gate in his first year as a head coach, or he's going to win a few games right off the bat and kind of falter a little bit. There is a lot of uncertainty, and I based my previous predictions off of the best case scenario, but I don't think that the best case scenario is guaranteed here, and I think it is possible that Kevin O'Connell struggles a little bit in his first season, which I would not blame him for, because it's really tough to go out of the gate as a starting or as a first-year coach in this league and just make noise right away, although he is gifted with a very talented roster to do so. So we'll see what happens, but I have the Vikings at 2nd here. And then we have the Green Bay Packers winning the division. Uncertainty there too with the wide receiver room, but it's still Aaron Rodgers. And on top of that, I think their defense is going to be so scary this year to the point where I did predict the Vikings to beat them week 1, but I think the Packers will end up either tying with wins for the Vikings and getting a tiebreaker here and there, or they will end up winning one more and going 12-5 and winning this division. as painful as it is to say that, that's got to be my prediction. Next, we got the NFC South, where I have the Atlanta Falcons firmly in last place here. I mean, they have a couple guys like Kyle Pitts who are kind of, they've got a possibility to win a couple more games with a guy like Kyle Pitts. And Marcus Mariota, I think, is still a little undervalued. He can be a better quarterback than people think. But besides that, they really don't have many pieces to work with. Maybe a couple on each side of the ball, but they are really struggling as far as just getting momentum, because they start that rebuild process and they really have not gained momentum yet. They're kind of, I would assume they're in their lowest point of the rebuild right now, and that's why they're firmly in last place, in my opinion, in the NFC South. And then you've got kind of a jumble here where I think there's a clear number one, and then there's two number twos or threes that could go either way. But I'm going to put the Carolina Panthers at third. Because while Baker Mayfield, I do believe, will put up big numbers week 1 against the Browns, because he has a lot to prove against the Browns here, I just don't trust, first of all, his sustainability as far as his arm and his shoulder. That is kind of a difficult injury, even though it is not on his throwing shoulder. When you're a quarterback, you're going to get hit. That is going to be an issue, and it very clearly was an issue for him last year, and it caused him to underperform. But that's not the only reason he underperformed. He also had some decision-making issues, and he was given a good deal of weapons that he wasn't able to capitalize on. And I don't think that Baker's weapons are much better in Carolina, because he does have more. But could you really argue that Donovan Peoples-Jones and DJ Moore are kind of similar players, big play caliber players that aren't super flashy but will get the job done? And even I would argue that DJ Moore is better than Donovan Peoples-Jones, but he's not a tier better. And I just don't think the wide receiver room is good enough for Baker Mayfield. I do think that it's going to be interesting with Christian McCaffrey, but I just don't believe in their offense or defense enough to give them third. Which brings me to second, which is the New Orleans Saints. I heard on Good Morning Football some people saying that they predicted the Saints to win the division. I just don't see that. I think that Jameis Winston still has a lot more to prove. He had a few good games last year, but I mean, were they good enough for you to be convinced that he can lead a team into the playoffs? And those were some games against a Packers team that was all over the place week 1. I mean, that was not the same Packers team that played the rest of the year. And then a few more wins against teams that really weren't that good. And what we're going to see with Jameis Winston is, will he be able to come up clutch in A, the big moments, and B, against teams that are going to be pressuring him, teams with good cornerbacks that are going to be ball hawking for those interceptions that he has been throwing throughout his entire career. And I do think Jameis Winston is going to make those key mistakes in big moments that are going to cost the Saints games. And for that reason, I don't see the Saints being a team that can contend for the division. We'll have to see, but I just don't see it. And that leads to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even if I believed more in the Saints, I'd still go with the Buccaneers, because you can't bet against Tom Brady. He has not shown any signs of slowing down. Yeah, there were a couple things where he had to leave the team and come back, but if there's any other quarterback that did that, I'd be a little concerned. But you can't say that Tom Brady is going to be any worse because of a two-week kind of hiatus that he took, and I'm not going to go into what the reason for that was. It could be a more serious issue, so I'm not going to speculate. But like I've been saying, you can't bet against Tom Brady even in a situation like that. So I'm going to say the Buccaneers win the NFC South. Next, we have the NFC West, which is, I think, going to be the second best division in football. And we're going to obviously kick it off with the Seahawks. They might win 4 or 5 games this year. Geno Smith starting off for them, and his only relief if he doesn't do well is Drew Lock. This isn't a good combination. DK Metcalf becomes basically their only big star on this team, and Russell Wilson leaving is just icing on the cake. They won, 5-6 games with Russell Wilson last year. This team's going to be bad, plain and simple. Then we've got in third, and this is a tough decision, but I'm going to say the San Francisco 49ers are third. And this is a team that people have going first, and these 3 teams you could really make arguments for. But Deebo Samuel is going to have a really tough time sustaining what he did last year. I mean, he had a prolific season last year with rushing, passing. I mean, even if defenses were to figure him out, he couldn't be stopped. This year, I think there's a kind of a higher chance that he gets figured out a little bit more, especially if Jimmy Garoppolo cannot create more plays for this team. I think that if Deebo Samuel becomes too much of that guy that they use all the time, then there's going to be problems. And obviously they still have George Kittle. They still have a pretty formidable defense. But until I see Jimmy Garoppolo elevate his game just a tad bit more, I think I'm going to put him at third, put the San Francisco 49ers at third. And again, anytime you put a team at third in any division, people are going to act like you're saying they suck. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the NFC West is a very good division with a lot of good teams, and they just happen to be the third best team in this division. Which leads us to the Cardinals and Rams, and this is a really tough choice because I initially was thinking, what about Super Bowl hangover with the Rams, but Super Bowl hangover doesn't happen to these kinds of teams at the same degree that it does others. You know, you got a 49ers team back in 2019 that had that Super Bowl hangover. They were younger, more inexperienced, a less experienced coach in those situations, and they kind of crumbled a little bit the next year. But we're seeing a different team in the Rams that, first of all, won it. It's kind of different to lose it and win it when it comes to Super Bowl hangover. And second of all, you've got a team that is made up of all these veteran guys, such a strong, tight-knit group of veteran players and also young, talented players that know how to win and lose and deal with adversity. And these aren't the kind of teams that experience some big Super Bowl hangover, and I think that they're not going to experience that hardly at all this year. They're going to keep plowing ahead, and I think they're going to win the division. It's a really tough pick between them and the Cardinals. The Cardinals are a great team as well, and I think that they are being severely disrespected by a lot of fans and analysts out there. I think that the drama with Kyler Murray takes your attention away from the fact that this defense is still really good. And they did lose Chandler Jones last year, but they still have a lot of great guys. Hopefully J.J. Watt can stay healthy, which is a huge if. But if he can, it'll really help the defense as well. And then DeAndre Hopkins will come back in week 7, I believe. And I mentioned this, you can listen to a little more of it in my last podcast talking about the Vikings playing the Cardinals. But Hopkins is being disrespected to such a high degree. He gets hurt a little bit and then gets a suspension. He doesn't play for maybe a year total. And all of a sudden, last year at this time, people were saying he was the best wide receiver in the league. I was saying at least that he was the best wide receiver in the league. And now people are saying, oh man, he's not going to be the same anymore. And it does sometimes happen. That happened to Michael Thomas when he got hurt, but those two aren't on the same playing field in my opinion. And I think Hopkins is going to come back and make some more big plays for the Cardinals and put them back into contention. And even with all the drama surrounding Kyler Murray, he's a tremendous quarterback, and I think he's going to lead this team well. But I do think they're going to be second in this division. So let's go into the 1 through 7, how these teams are going to rank, and I'll give you my 3 NFC playoff teams as well. So in the number 1 seed, it is very difficult pick for me, but I'm going to have to go with the Buccaneers as the first seed. I will say I do think this NFC conference is much less stacked than the AFC conference, and I'm going to get into that in just a few minutes. But I think the Buccaneers stand above, and I do think the Rams and Bucs are right there with each other, but the Rams are going to be in a more difficult division, which means they will most likely lose a couple more games. It's just kind of an issue with being a Super Bowl team, having a tougher schedule and having to deal with all that I think is going to put the Buccaneers ahead. So Bucs, number 1, Rams I think will be the second seed. And then I do believe that the Packers will be third this year, followed up by the Dallas Cowboys in the 4th seed, like they always are. Any time the NFC East wins a division, any team the division winner of the NFC East will be number 4 in the playoffs. So that's just kind of a given in life. So now moving on to the wild card predictions for the NFC. We have the Cardinals, I think, in fifth. I think that I do believe in this team, like I've been mentioning. I think that they'll be falling just short of the Rams, but I think they'll win enough games to get that fifth seed. And then I have the Vikings at 11-6 going into the sixth seed. And I think that the Cardinals and Vikings will end up with the same record going at the end of this year, or more or less. I think they'll end up with the same record. And if that happens, the Cardinals would have the tiebreaker over the Vikings. So two teams at 11-6 at 5-6. And then seventh seed is really hard to predict because we've got teams like the Saints that could be in the mix. We've got the Eagles that could easily be in the mix for that last spot. The 49ers. And the team that I feel like I want to take a bet on is the Eagles. I'm going to say they will be the seventh seed. Obviously, I think that the Saints have a chance. I don't believe in them quite as much, though, with Jameis Winston. And the 49ers are probably the one that people are going to be the most mad at me for not even putting them in the wild card conversation. And they very much could be, but something about them makes me feel like they're going to be just short this year. So those are your NFC West full predictions. So let's move up now to the AFC, where there's a couple easy divisions and a couple hard divisions to predict. We'll start off with probably the easiest division to predict, in my opinion, and I have the New York Jets in fourth in the AFC East. It's pretty much a given why. I think that they are still a little ways away from starting to hit that stride and really start to improve their team where they can actually start being a formidable, and I think Sauce Gardner will be great for them. I think that they've got some things going, but Zach Wilson being out for 3 weeks doesn't help them at all, and even then I think they'll win 3-4 games again this year, but next year could be their year where they really start to show flashes because they are starting to develop the young talent, so we'll see how it goes, but for this year, I have at least one more year with them at number 4. Next, we have the New England Patriots at 3. It's kind of funny. This is actually going right in the order of how it shows up on the NFL site for the current standings where everything's 0-0. But it just happens to work out that way where it's all in the right order. Patriots are third, and I have them at third because everything I've heard this offseason, I'm not trying to buy into everything that analysts say, but I have heard a lot of stuff about how the chemistry seems to be kind of off. Mac Jones is not improving. I do see Mac Jones as kind of being one of those quarterbacks that if you give him a lot of good weapons around him, he can make things happen, but he just seems to have this ceiling. And again, this is kind of a speculation. It's only the second year, but he seems to have a ceiling to me that he isn't going to get much higher than throughout his career. And I think that's going to be true about this team this year. They seem to have a ceiling, and that ceiling seems to be around 6-7 wins. In my opinion, their defense got worse, and I just don't see them contending against either of these two teams. Second, we have the Miami Dolphins, where Tua Tagovailoa is going to be the story all year. This is a really difficult team to predict, and I can see this team winning 10, 11 games. I can see this team winning 6 or 7, but I'm choosing to go on the little more glass half full side and say that Tua figures it out with a deep threat. He finally has enough threats on offense to kind of start making some noise if he is a good enough quarterback to do that. And I think he does have a lot of flashes. I think he will be able to deliver. And their defense is really something scary when they're all on the field and healthy. So I do think the Dolphins are going to be that swing team. It's kind of like the Vikings to me, where they've got enough talent to really make that leap, but they could easily also slide back down where they were in previous years and just not be able to take that next step. So I do have the Dolphins at second, but it's easy that the Buffalo Bills are going to win this division, and it would be the biggest shock in the NFL this year to me. This is something that I would bet a good deal of money on, that the Bills would win, if I had any money, that the Bills would win in this division, and handily as well. Josh Allen is emerging as one of the better quarterbacks in the league. He's definitely top 5 at this point, in my opinion. Stephon Diggs honestly had kind of a down year compared to other years he's had, which is crazy because he still had a fantastic year. And I think he's going to be even better this year. He's going to carry this team. and that opening matchup between Jalen Ramsey and Stephon Diggs is going to be a great one to watch. So that'll be a lot of fun. But like I've been saying, this Bills team is stacked all across the board. They have such a complete roster, and I think that they're going to be a Super Bowl favorite this year. So that is the easiest to predict AFC East. And then we have two teams that are easy to predict, two teams that are difficult with the AFC North. We're going to start things off. I think that the Cleveland Browns are going to be last, and hopefully they lose enough games where even if Deshaun Watson comes in and plays well, they will lose out to the division. And I'm not going to talk too much about Deshaun Watson because there's just so many questions surrounding it. And, I'm going to give an honest opinion. I'm not going to give my honest opinion because it's just going to create too much controversy. And if more things come out, then I will say my full-on opinion about it. But the Browns are going to be last in this division, and they're just have too many games. Even if Deshaun Watson played the last few games of the season, there's going to be too many that they have already lost. And I also think Deshaun Watson will be very rusty coming off of not playing for basically 2 or more years at this point. So they'll be last. Pittsburgh Steelers, I don't believe in Mitch Trubisky, and I think this defense is good enough to keep him in games enough where they will end up in third above the Browns, but they're not going to contend for much else other than that. Obviously, TJ Watt is going to be a big factor for this team like he always is, and they do still have Chase Claypool and a few other options on offense, but I don't believe in Mitch Trubisky enough. You'd have to give him a lot of great options in order for him to lead a team further than 7 wins maybe. So I see this Steelers team as another 7-10, 8-9 type team that isn't quite going to make the playoffs. There's a quick spoiler for you. The Steelers won't make the playoffs in my predictions. So now you've got the tough decision between the Ravens and the Bengals in the AFC North. Who's going to take the crown? And you know how I earlier mentioned that the Rams are not going to be one of those teams that experiences Super Bowl hangover because they have such a veteran presence. They're so, they feel like they've been there before because there's so many different established veterans that have been to that point. They're going to be able to handle adversity well. The Bengals are the kind of team, unfortunately, that are going to experience Super Bowl hangover, at least what history would suggest. Like I mentioned, it happened with the 49ers when they lost the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. They kind of just fell into a hole, and obviously that was also injuries that happened that season. But in that next season, there were a lot of issues with that team. They seemed to experience a lot of Super Bowl hangover, and I think that if there's any team that can happen to, it's a team like the Bengals that are very young. It was kind of remarkable that they even made it last year, and now they are going to be a good, formidable team, but I just don't see them winning the division this year when that Super Bowl hangover does exist in the way that it does for teams like this. So Bengals will be second, and then I have the Ravens at first. Obviously, this is a huge if based off of if they can stay on the field or not. Because if Lamar Jackson can stay on the field, he is a big difference maker. He is a big headache for a lot of teams, and he is going to manufacture wins single-handedly for this team. And then you've got, with Lamar Jackson in the running game, you don't seem to ever need any big-name running back in your backfield. With Lamar, there's any chance that he's going to just take off in the next instant. It gives you an opportunity for a running back to just slip along the other side. And the Ravens have never really needed a really good running back to go up the middle. So I think Dobbins is going to be, and Gus Edwards are going to be a good 1-2 punch for them. And then their passing attack, I think, is pretty solid too. Not to mention their defense has always been pretty solid as well. So I do think that they are going to be the division winners for the AFC North. 2 more divisions to go here. We have the AFC South, and I'm going to kick this off by putting the Houston Texans in this bottom spot. I think the Texans will be the worst team in the league this year, and they will get the number 1 pick, and some poor sap has to go to the Texans after being picked number 1 overall in this next upcoming draft. I just think the Texans are all over the place. They have nothing going for them right now, and just even it's just tough for these guys to play for an organization like this with so many allegations. It's not just the Deshaun Watson stuff. There's been other things that have surfaced, and it's just a big mess of an organization right now. And there's a lot of things the Texans, I think, need to figure out before they even start thinking about rebuilding their team. So they will not win many more than 2-3 wins this season, and that's being kind of conservative, honestly. So that'll be last. And then we have the Jaguars at third. Some glimmers of hope for this team. Trevor Lawrence, I'm hoping people don't write him off too early because a rookie season doesn't have to mean anything if you play kind of poorly. And hopefully he can come out firing again and play well. I mean, just a year ago, people were raving about him as a generational talent. And hopefully with better weapons this year and kind of starting to sign some more guys and build up this team a little more, he can play a little better and prove that he is still can be a good quarterback and have a good career in the league. Hoping nothing but the best for him, but I do think they will be third, just above the Texans. They've got a couple more years to go before they're really going to make some noise. And then we have the Colts and the Titans. Now, we're going to put the Colts at second. I do think that the Titans will win this division. The Colts, I just don't. There's something about Matt Ryan on that team. It makes me a little hesitant to want to think that they'll succeed. I want Matt Ryan to succeed, but I just don't think that the Colts have the offensive weapons to revitalize his career. They do have a pretty good defense, and they do have Jonathan Taylor. There's going to be some good pieces on that team, and I do think that they will be competitive all year long, but I just don't trust Matt Ryan as he's aging and as Michael Pittman is really his only best wide receiver on that team. So I just can't pick them to win this division. And the Titans, year after year after year, I always say the same thing. I say, this is going to be the year that Derrick Henry gets slowed down. They're going to figure him out, and it just never happens. I'm going to stop saying that because I always think, the other team is going to start stacking the box, and Ryan Tannehill's not going to know what to do, but it doesn't matter how many guys you have stacked up in the box. Derrick Henry is going to run through all of them, and it just every time you think it's going to be an issue, it just isn't, except for in the playoffs. It does end up being an issue in the playoffs, but this is a Titans team that is built to win in the regular season. They might choke in the postseason often, but this is a team that is built to win a good deal of games, and they will win this AFC South, a very winnable AFC South. Finally, the marquee prediction that has been a headache for everyone all this offseason, a division that even this one division alone makes every single week of NFL football worth watching. This is going to be the most exciting division to watch in recent history. The AFC West, where you have the Denver Broncos newly acquiring Russell Wilson, getting Randy Gregory on their defense, just fortifying both sides of this team. They're going to be good. Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. They did lose Tyreek Hill. They gained Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm not saying that that's a comparable trade there. I'm not saying they traded them, but you know what I mean. That trade-off is not quite equal, but they still have a lot of good weapons. Travis Kelce, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is pretty slept-on running back in the league, and Patrick Mahomes is going to ball out no matter what happens. And this defense is still pretty decent, so they're great as well. Raiders, newly acquired, there's no way I forgot his name, Davante Adams. If I'm a Vikings fan and forget Davante Adams' name, that's just insane. Davante Adams, they gain. Derek Carr, I think, is just one of those quarterbacks that it just seems like he's always one little thing away, one little gear he needs to shift before he has a really good year. And maybe that's never going to happen, but I feel like if there's any year that'll happen, it'll be this year. They also have still Darren Waller on that offense, and they added a few pieces on defense as well. Still have the Yannick Ngakoue on that team, as far as I remember. So another good team there. And then the Los Angeles Chargers. Forget whether or not the team will win enough games. No matter what happens, this team's just going to be electric to watch year after year for the coming next few years. This team has so much young talent. Justin Herbert is going to be, in my opinion, one of the top 3 quarterbacks in this league after this season. There's just something about him that I just feel like he is going to be near the top. He already is near the top. I think he's top 6 right now. He'll be top 3 by the end of the year, in my opinion. And just every single team in this division is special. But I have to go with a team in 4th somehow in this division. Every single team in this division, in my opinion, would win in the AFC South, just to be clear. So any team I put at 4th, I'm not saying they're bad. And that team has to be the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders, in a situation where Derek Carr, like I just mentioned, is kind of on the cusp of a really good season, but he doesn't quite get there. And Josh Jacobs, I think if he figures himself out and becomes a better running back in the league again, I think this team could definitely rise up in the division. But I just think that they didn't do quite enough to rise up to the level of some of these other teams in this division. And so for that reason, I have them at 4th. Now, this is where it gets even more difficult because there's teams with question marks. The Chiefs, can they keep going without Tyreek Hill? I do think they will be able to, but to what degree? Los Angeles Chargers, they always seem to have so much talent on their team, but they kind of choke in the regular season. It's kind of the opposite of the Titans. They could be so good in the postseason if they just have a chance to, but then they lose winnable games, and I do think it'll be different this year, but again, to what degree? How well will they be able to change and turn things around for the organization? The Denver Broncos, obviously Russell Wilson is a fantastic player, and the Broncos gave up a lot for him, but as always, whenever a quarterback goes to a new team, it could really end in disaster, or they could end up being fantastic for them. Peyton Manning ended up being fantastic, but we've seen plenty of examples of good QBs going to another team, and it just doesn't quite work out the way it did with their first team that they ever played with. As well as the fact that, is Jerry Jeudy going to have his breakout year? Is he not going to? How is the running back situation going to work? Is Javonte Williams going to be as good as people think he is going to be? A lot of unanswered questions for all these teams, but 3rd place, in my opinion, is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers. Difficult for me to say because I've always been kind of a side fan of the Chargers. Obviously, the Vikings are my main team always, but there's a few other teams I root for, like the Bills. I root for the Chargers. Just teams that haven't won. I guess just teams that haven't won the Super Bowl yet, because join the club, right? But I do like the Chargers, and I do think that they will be good contenders this year. But they'll be 3rd in the best division in the NFL because I just think that they are 1 year removed from having the veteran presence that these other teams have. Derek Carr is established veteran. Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes are established veterans. And Justin Herbert, I think, has 1 more year to really fully mature, as well as a lot of other young guys on this team. They have a lot of young talent, but I think they need a few more veteran guys on this team to really build around them, and I think that's what's keeping them from winning those big games and winning enough to take this division or get a chance at taking this division. I really hope I'm wrong because I love this team, and it's going to be really exciting to watch them. That Raiders-Chargers game week 1 will be insane, but I just don't know if I can pick them against these other teams. 2nd will be the Broncos. So Russell Wilson is going to be good for this Broncos team, and I think that they have a defense that is really underrated. I think that the Broncos defense is going to put up a lot of points, get a lot of takeaways, and prevent a lot of teams from doing what they do. But I just have a couple more questions about this team than the Chiefs, and we've seen the Chiefs ball out year after year after year. Yes, they lost Tyreek Hill as a big, deep threat. I think that will take this team down a notch, but it's preaching to the choir, but Patrick Mahomes is just the real deal. He still has Travis Kelce. He still has McCole Hardman, and he still has the opportunity to run to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. This defense still has a lot of key pieces, and the Chiefs are one of those teams I have to see them dethroned before I pick another team against them, and for that reason, they're going to be 1st in this division. So, even though it's funny because even though this AFC West is the best division in football, I think that they're going to be taken down a peg, the division winner, as far as the 1 through 4, just because they have to play so many tough games all year long against these other teams in the division. So for that reason, they're not going to be second, first, or even second. Bills will be first, obviously for reasons I already explained. Ravens will be second, barely above the Chiefs. I'm predicting the Bills to be a team that wins about 14 games, maybe 14-3. And then I see the Ravens winning close to maybe 12 or even 13. And it'll be the same thing with these teams. I say the Chiefs win about 12 games, which I know what you're thinking. All these teams could be Super Bowl contenders. How can you say they'll only win 12 games? But just think about the standard of competition. You have to play 6 games total against these 3 teams all year long, and that instantly makes your schedule so much harder than these other AFC teams. So I'm going to say that the Chiefs are 3rd seed, and that's going to finish off with the Titans being 4. Now let's go into the wild card teams. I know I said the Bengals will have Super Bowl hangover, but I do still think they'll be in the playoffs. I don't have them at 5, though. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that the Denver Broncos will be 5th seed. We'll have the Los Angeles Chargers at 6th seed, and then the Bengals will be 7th seed. And think about that, the level that this AFC is in this year, where we have the Cincinnati Bengals at 7th. That is just insane to think about, and I'm so excited to watch this AFC this year. But those are my official predictions. Thank you so much for watching, and I know this is kind of a long-winded video. When I go over kind of breaking down the games, I'll try and make it a little bit shorter in the future. Do keep in mind that in the future I will be doing these kind of initial reactions to the end of the Vikings games. I forgot to mention that in the last video, but make sure you stay tuned for those. It'll be just 2-minute to 3-minute initial reactions, just completely raw reaction. Like I'll start recording as soon as the game ends and just kind of give my thoughts, and then I'll break it down more in the future, but just keep an eye out for that as well. Thanks again, and again, my very next video will be breaking down week 1 game by game and giving you my full predictions for who I think will win and who I think will lose in these so many great opening games. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the flip side.